This is Martin Barrios reporting for Spero News. We're speaking today to Jennifer Breedon. She's an attorney and also an expert on Islam. She works for the Clarion Project, which is a very interesting organization based in Washington, D.C., that focuses on the political and cultural aspects of Islam. Could you tell us, Jennifer, a little bit about what the Clarion Project is all about?
Absolutely, yes. The Clarion Project was founded in 2006, and one of the things we try to do is to challenge extremism as we see it, specifically radical Islamic extremism, and we do that on a number of fronts. We've produced several different films, such as Obsession and The Third Jihad, and Iranium, about Iran's nuclear program. We've done many things like that, and what we try to do is not only challenge extremism across the world and in the United States from a realistic perspective, but we also give a platform to Muslims that are speaking out against the violence, the atrocities, and really the fundamental ideological issues that are plaguing Islam and more extremist versions of Islam. And so that's what we try to do. We work with many Muslims as well. Can
it be said that the attack in Orlando is an example of Islamic radicalism or Islamic terrorism? We've seen, that there are reports that that the perpetrator, Omar Mateen, may himself have been homosexual, or accusations of that, and that he had cased the club and had been in contact with some of the people who went to the Pulse Club in Orlando.
I think this was definitely an example of a radical Islamic attack. I think that they have been other versions of this sort of Islamist ideology or more extremist ideology. They want to repaint the picture. This is the example or the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States and many of these Islamist organizations that are not moderate voices for the Muslim American people. And they're coming out and they want to paint this as a hate crime. They want to paint it as somebody that was conflicted. They want to paint it as a far-right extremist, influential thing that made this individual hate himself for being homosexual, and that's really just not true.
Well,
the fact
I'm sorry, but you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. What is the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States today?
Well, really, the influence of them, they're very, very brilliant. The U.S. Muslim Brotherhood has financed and founded many, many organizations. The Department of Justice has confirmed this. There are several reports on that. And the Muslim Brotherhood about 30 years ago came out and they said, and the FBI has this, so does the Department of Justice, on good record saying that the Muslim Brotherhood's intent is to infiltrate the U.S. American political structure and basically use our laws against us, start to strip away our freedom of speech and start to really use that kind of freedom that we give to people against them in trying to really just take away what America is in order to influence political positions. That's really what has happened with them, and that's what's also been kind of framing the conversation around Omar Mateen. I mean, you saw that there are organizations and people that have spoken out calling this a hate crime, calling this only about homosexuals, when that's not the case at all. This is somebody who pledged allegiance to ISIS. This is somebody who, as a high schooler, Omar Mateen cheered the 9/11 attacks. His high school colleagues remember that perfectly. So this is not somebody who just was conflicted internally about being gay. This is somebody who had hatred in his soul because of a radical Islamic ideology and acted on that and finally found a platform through the Islamic State in which to do so. Well, I think one of the most successful organizations of the Muslim Brotherhood is the organization CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. They were an unindicted co-conspirator in the 2007 Holy Land Foundation trial, but they are a financier of CARE. Muslim Brotherhood is a financier of CARE. They're one of the main founders of that. And I think CARE, in the way that they operate, calling out Islamophobia, really perpetuating this word that's never really existed that makes people absolutely terrified to say anything. I mean, for example, not only in Orlando, but in San Bernardino, neighbors, friends, and colleagues all noticed suspicious behavior days and weeks before the attacks, and were afraid to say anything because they were afraid they were going to be painted as a racist or an Islamophobe or something like that. And that's the kind of ideology that CARE has perpetuated, and this is a group that has very close ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. I think that's one of the most successful examples.
No, something that I've wondered about, and maybe you could help me with it, is after the San Bernardino attacks, and there have been others, there have been instances where for example, in San Bernardino, the family members of the perpetrators went to the Council on American Islamic Relations as a representative. Why would they do that?
Well, I mean, for exactly the reasons I said. I mean, this is an organization that has gone out and really sued. They've sued many American corporations. They come out and they're pretending to be a voice of the moderates. And the truth is they're not a voice of moderate Muslims. They're not a voice of Muslim reformists. They're not at all. And Muslim reformists have stood out against them saying such. But what they do is they try to get their voice out. They have unlimited financial resources that they've been unwilling to divulge in public. And we have good reason. We have FBI documents that show they're connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. So these family members, they go to them because they trust them, they see them as something, and a lot of times they offer their services for free because they want to put themselves out as the main voice on behalf of all Muslims. And so the family members do that. They trust them. We don't have much information on whether the family members were all in San Bernardino. We don't have much information on whether all the family members were also radicalized or involved, but in this case, Omar Mateen's father is a supporter of the Taliban, an outspoken supporter of the Taliban.
Have there been any instances of Muslims in the United States speaking out against what might be called political Islam, or the agenda of turning the debate, as you have said?
Absolutely. The one that comes to mind is Raheel Raza. Raheel Raza has a very outspoken voice about this. She was born in Pakistan. She lives in North America, and she goes around speaking about this issue, not only about violent jihadist Islam like ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah, but she speaks about political Islam, which she calls fundamentalism, and political Islamic or Islamist activities such as the Muslim Brotherhood. She's very outspoken. She's very brilliant on this, and she's partnered with the Clarion Project on many different projects and events.
Can you offer any kind of a hypothesis as to why President Obama has not wanted to identify radical Islamism as the root and the cause of so much of the terror in the world?
Honestly, there are probably several hypotheses on this. The one that I would most posit is just the fact that he truly does believe that the best way to stop this violence is to just not call it what it is. But the fact is that it seems like what the Muslim Brotherhood, what the political Islamists have intended to do, and that is really to silence our freedom of speech. We call it political correction or political correctness. We call it all these other things, and really what that is just stripping away our First Amendment. They don't want us to say what it is. They want to go under the radar. They want us to call it hate crimes or lone wolf gun attacks rather than the genocidal extremist campaign that it is. And it sounds like President Obama has played right into their hands when he refuses to call it this, because what he's doing is exactly what they want. And we do know that CARE has a red carpet to the White House.
Okay, but what do you mean a red carpet? Explain that.
I call it a red carpet. They've been invited to many events. CARE has they're always invited to top White House correspondent events and different things like that. Many instances where CARE's top officials have met with the Obama administration, and so they have a front door really to the administration. And when these kinds of people whose ideologies coincide with the Muslim Brotherhood, which says our goal is to quietly and slowly infiltrate the American freedom of speech and political system. That's exactly what they're doing, and they've been very good at it and very successful. And now the President of the United States will not even mention radical Islam, so much so that his speeches, when he is called out for not mentioning it, his speeches will take the time to argue against political backlash in words rather than just calling it exactly what it is, which is exactly what the gunman himself said it was.
Now, do you see any coincidence, or I guess maybe the word is that the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood and leftists, whether here in the United States or Europe, may coincide or are coterminous?
Well, yes, and it's interesting how you say it like that, because they really do coincide. But the fact is that our enemies know our weaknesses, and they see they see a lot of many of these left-wing outlets and many of the left in the U.S., or just the kind of the Western, the European mentality of this liberal wanting to appease people, wanting everyone to be happy. They see that as a weakness which they can infiltrate. And it's not to say that, all of these political issues are wrong, but the fact is they knew exactly who to target, and that was the left in the United States of America. Actually, one of the Muslim Brotherhood's goals, as stated in a Department of Justice memorandum, several of them, is to reach out to, quote, liberal organizations such as the Black Lives Movement, which they also reached out to, liberal or left-wing organizations that would be more willing to get involved with their cause and to be appeasing.
Can you point to a specific instance or of alliance between the Muslim Brotherhood or the Council on American Islamic Relations with a leftist or progressive organization or individual here in the United States?
Yes, actually, I can do that. Just in regards to the Clarion Project alone, I can do that for one of my colleagues, Ryan Morrow, who was asked to speak to the New York Police Officer Training Association. And this is a giant association set up it was in New York. It was going to be all the New York police officers, about 600 attendees. And they just simply asked him to speak on education of extremism. And he was going to talk in that speech, and he had kind of given his bullet points. He was going to talk in that speech about just about how there are so many wonderful reformist, moderate Muslims like Raheel Raza, other people that I've mentioned, Zuhdi Jasser, who speak out against this kind of violence. There are millions of them around the world who are also being targeted by extremists. And then on the flip side, Ryan was going to then talk about some of the dangers of groups like CARE and more Islamist type groups in the United States. And when that came out, CARE released a news release. They partnered with the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Southern Poverty Law Center has labeled Ryan Morrow as an extremist and a terrorist. I'm not actually even sure if there's any legal justification. There's not really. Nobody's really argued with them or gone against them on this. But they have labeled him as such, and CARE has partnered with them, and then they partnered with others in that area where Ryan was going and protested, demanding a nonprofit organization, the New York Officer Training Organization, to completely fire Ryan from being allowed to speak there and to not speak about anything involving the word Islam, which incidentally is what our Department of Justice has passed down as of 2010, is that no police officers are allowed to be trained with the use of the word jihadi or radical Islam.
How can the American people, or rather, what should the American people know about political Islam that they may not know now? I mean, people have made largely the choice that they don't wish to be associated with religious Islam, but what should they know about political Islam that they may not know now?
All they need to know is the one thing is that its goal in the United States is to strip away our First Amendment right of freedom of speech. That's it. Many of the reformist Muslims are coming out. They're calling it what it is. They're saying this is radical jihadist Islam, and we need to look at it squarely. They've done that in Egypt. They've done that in other countries. but we can't do it here. And so what the American people need to know is that they cannot be afraid against the backlash of organizations that will call them racists or bigots or Islamophobes. Islamophobia is a made-up word. I can make up a word about flying turtles, and if I perpetuate it enough for the right organizations, people don't want to be called that. This is not a word. We have to call these things what they are and suspicious behaviors what they are. And that's what political Islam wants to do, is shut us up. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Have you or any of your colleagues at the Clarion Project been subjected to death threats?
Oh, yes. I was actually speaking with somebody about that. It's one of the Muslims that I work with, and we have it's a great thing at the Clarion Project because it's kind of an interfaith coalition, but we have many Muslims on board, and we kind of joked about how this particular person gets death threats, and they actually have an email file for their death threats. Ryan's threatened, he's labeled as an extremist and a terrorist, and I'm kind of the newest member on board, having just left another organization. So I'm sure that they're going to come soon. I'm waiting for the countdown.
And any fatwas or Islamic religious findings against people on your staff?
Not that I know of. I think the only ones, fatwas or religious findings, the worst ones are going to be against people like Rihil Raza or the Muslims that work on our staff or other Muslims that we partner with that speak out against this because they're labeled as apostates. And apostasy is a crime that's punishable by death under Sharia authorities. And so all of those religious findings, anyone that speaks out against, violent or jihadi behaviors or groups, and calls it a radicalized form of Islam that needs to be reformed, they're going to be labeled as apostates and they should be killed.
Now, there have been a few instances I've seen. For example, there was I believe it was in Chicago, or maybe New York, a group of Muslims who identify themselves as homosexuals who prayed for the victims of Orlando. Was this a legitimate expression of condolence?
Well, we don't have any information yet to look into that. What we try to do, and this is what's so difficult about this task, is we try to look into each group and their condolences and what they say, is just to see for just how realistic or how sincere this actually is. However, that being said, this group, there's also another group in the United Kingdom that's a group of homosexuals that are Muslims that speak out against this and pray against this. If they were more radicalized or fundamentalized in this way, just being homosexual and like living that lifestyle is something that it's another crime that's punishable by death, just like apostasy. So it would be much harder for them. However, there are Islamic laws where if it is for the cause, and the cause they believe is to, infiltrate the U.S., then you are allowed to lie and break, even fundamental rules in Islam if that lie serves the cause. We don't know this.
Isn't that called in Arabic taqiyya?
Taqiyya, yes.
Oh, can you explain? Can you explain that a little further?
Sure. Really, just very basically, there are many, many laws in Islam, and just things that are whether they're more fundamental or not, but just many things that are considered sins, and many religions have that. But under the doctrine of taqiyya, if you are fighting for the holy war or jihad or for the cause of Allah, and that's really the basis. And so really anybody can make up what that is. If the cause of Allah is to conquer the United States or to infiltrate them politically and quietly and slowly, whatever the cause of Allah is, and even if you believe the cause of Allah is to be a peaceful, law-abiding Muslim citizen, but the concept of taqiyya states that for the more radicalized people that they are allowed to lie. This means Iran and U.S. nuclear negotiations. This means really anybody that says or does anything for that sake. So it doesn't matter what happens, whether it's a political entity or just somebody that is trying to further the cause.
Well, you've certainly given us a really good rundown on the public relations campaign of political Islam, and I want to thank you for talking with us today.
Well, thank you.
We've been talking to Jennifer Breedon of the Clarion Project. She's an expert on Islam and an attorney. Clarion Project seeks to expose the political ramifications of Islamists here in the United States. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Martin.